It's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service here today to present Chiron, the video entitled Healing Turning Points. So we're going to look at Chiron as the centaur, what it represents in a chart when we read it, how we would read it or look at it, whether it be a transit or an aspect. I'm going to be using two resources for this video. I'm going to use Barbara Hand Clow. This is a little bit like a cookbook. It was printed in 93, I think, 1993. She does a great job. It's called Rainbow Bridge for the Outer to the Inner Planets, but it's more of a cookbook, okay? Philosophically, I lean more toward, of course, my teacher, Martha Lang Westcott, and she does a really nice job in Mechanics of the Future with Chiron. So I'm going to use both of these resources during this video. We're going to first look at a bunch of notes that I have written so that we can get some keywords and phrases that relate to Chiron, both direct and retrograde, as we would read it in a transit versus how we might read it as an aspect. Then we're going to jump to the ingress chart. Aries ingress into, Chiron's ingress into Aries, happened April 17th, 2018. So we're going to look at a chart in hindsight. We're going to look at how that chart has affected us for the last 3 years. It's quite mind-blowing, actually. Then the other thing I want to point out is that Chiron technically is only in a sign about 4 years. But one of the things that Barbara noted in her book is that even though Chiron was only discovered in 1977, they figured that from 1968 to 77 as a period when Chiron may have been in Aries. So we'll be looking at that. I wanted to go look at this just to make sure I had the right information. Chiron has a weird orb. Okay, so I wanted to point that out. Yeah, it's about 4 years, but it really kind of darts around. I'll give you an example. Remember, it was not discovered till 1977. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It was said to be in Aries, and I'm only going to start here, April of 1968 to October of 1968. It doesn't go into, then it goes back into Aries again, January of 69, and it stays there till 76, May of 76. So think about this. I mean, it's just darting. It goes from October of 76 to March of 77 when it finally leaves. So I just really had to throw that out there, that is an extremely strange orbit, and that what it means is that you can't look at Chiron and just assume that's because somebody was born the same year that you were, that you would have the same Chiron as they do. That's not going to happen. So I wanted to show you how crazy it is. So before I begin all the really fun stuff, I would like to thank all of my subscribers. I would like to thank most of all you for watching this video. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Also, like, comment. I would love to hear from you. But thank you for helping me build this channel. And thank you for allowing me into your life. So with that said, I want to jump to my notes first. So let's get in there and see what I have in terms of written notes. So what we have in front of us are the notes of Chiron, and I subtitled it Healing Turning Points. That's because Chiron is a healer, a wounded healer, but a healer nonetheless. And I always like to point this out as a person who trained other people physically for many decades. Healing is painful, okay? Healing is painful, whether it's emotional pain or if it's physical pain. So the first thing that we have to note is that Chiron is that in that very deep healing. That's what it represents. on one of the many things it represents. So a couple of key words for Chiron in general: pioneer, different perspective, a blend of Saturn and Uranus. This is right out of Martha's book. Now, let me just explain this a little bit. Barbara Hand Clow likes to use Virgo as the ruler of Chiron. And she even uses the sixth house and all of that. Well, he is a healer. He is a teacher. He is definitely somebody who, mythology-wise, serves mankind. But he's also a centaur. And there is a whole thing about centaurs, which maybe another video. Okay, we'll get to that. But centaurs are different. My teacher does not assign a ruler. What she assigned instead was this idea that the centaur itself was a blend of Saturn and Uranus energies. That it was Saturn and it was Uranus. And she goes into more detail when she begins to explain retrograde action. So if we get into retrograde, this is somebody who is just really not able to make that break from the parental allegiance, because it's almost like they're always in that kind of adolescence crisis of trying to be themselves. But in order to be themselves, it's like they have to go against others, or in this case, the parents. But it could, believe me, it's a Saturn figure. Ultimately, it would be bosses, teachers, etc., etc. When it's retrograde, it is much harder. Sorry, too much noise on the street, some motorcycle or something. I had to turn it off for a second. So I'm back, and I know where I was. I was talking about how Martha has really talked about the Saturn-Uranus, just to review here, and how it's difficult in a retrograde mode to break from the parental allegiance. That in order to be themselves, it's almost as though they have to go against the parent, the employer, okay? It's easier when the planet is direct for an individual to find their own uniqueness, okay? Because in order for some people to deal with Chiron is literally to deal with the idea, of rejection. I thought I put something else on. Here we go. So really what we're dealing with here is the idea that when it's direct, there's more of a road toward being uniquely yourself, that you know how to maybe navigate the waters. When it's retrograde, the concept or the idea of rejection is just almost overwhelming at times, because it's difficult to either make that break or to be that unique self. Okay, so as we go through this, remember that Chiron is about breaking rules. It really is about breaking rules. And it's not like it's intentional. I mean, let's be honest. People who are disabled, the same rules don't always apply to them. And it sort of works like that too. So I don't want to equate a good or a bad. I know it says, well, if you're not following the program. No, it's just, and we'll talk about that in a moment. It depends on how Chiron is aspected in your chart, how well you'll deal with it. So just a couple of things here. The concept of, there we go. The concept here that we're working with, the idea here is that it's about doing things your own way. Okay, it's getting around the system. Yes, that's definitely a factor. Okay, but I like this idea too, like underneath here, being against others as a way to demonstrate originality. It's almost like some people can't be original unless they're doing something completely contrary. Okay, that's a problem in some cases, but not always, because it also represents turning points. It represents mavericks. It represents the whole idea of rule breaking. Sometimes we do have to break the rules, or we won't evolve. I mean, if we were still following old rules, we would be still in the slave king era. I mean, there at some point, Chiron is about healing. It's about that evolution. So it's not all bad or all good. During transits, okay, particularly those transits that are in retrograde, okay, there it's definitely going to have a feel of Saturn because there's the release of tension hasn't been there. And you know, Saturn is about delays and restrictions. So Chiron can have a lot of, it can be a lot about delays and restrictions, just even in terms of the healing process or in terms of trying to define oneself and maybe going against the grain a little bit. So I went through this already. It was in Aries between 68 and 77. And you say to yourself, but that is 9 years. Well, that's just the erratic cycle of Chiron. And I went through that with you. It'll spend a few months it did it this time too, because it actually went back into Pisces for a little while, I believe, in 2019. So I'd have to look it up. But I think at the end of 2018 into 2019 kind of was doing its thing because of retrograde action and that strange cycle. It's kind of crazy, but it is about 50 and a half years. Then you have a Chiron return. If we're honored to live long enough, between 50 and 51, you can see, even with all the craziness of but remember, when you're talking about this kind of planet, it's going to get hit 3 times. So each time, even, no wonder it takes 9 years, okay? Because it takes so long, and then you get your hit, and then it goes back over, and then it comes back, takes another hit, goes back over. Now, one of the things that I pointed out in the beginning, and I want to reiterate here right now, is that the ingress chart is the main chart for the Aries energy. It really is, okay? Now, when it's tagging over the Pisces energy, or as we did just a couple years ago, the Aries ingress might not be as effective as the Piscean ingress, okay? So then you might go back to Pisces for that. But each time it's in Aries, it's definitely aspected by this Aries ingress chart. And then when it starts to go to Taurus, when it finally hits into Taurus for the first time, it will then alleviate this chart. But again, if it goes back into Aries, which it will, then that chart mingles with the Taurus chart, just as the Pisces chart mingled with the Aries chart at the beginning. So you see how it overlaps. And I hope that was clear, because I know that can be very muddled to understand. Understanding the cycle is probably one of the hardest parts about understanding Chiron. It's erratic. Remember, it breaks all the rules. And by the way, it is considered an asteroid. As a matter of fact, Chiron is considered the asteroid that began all the asteroids. So first we had Chiron, then we have the big 4. And then after the big 4, we got the deluge of the asteroid belt. So I just wanted to point that out. There was a definite process that was occurring. So Chiron brings us a lot. Now, I want to jump to the chart. So we're going to start with the ingress chart in Janus. And I want to point out, this is a fairly accurate chart. The 6 degree, I figure the most this could be is maybe right at 6, maybe 550 something or other. So in other words, we are nailing it here. Okay. This right here, this Neptune, and let's just look at what Neptune represents. Okay. I'm going to use my pen for all this. Neptune represents delusion, disillusion. It represents deluding of oneself, self-delusion. It represents disease, illnesses, things that might be even hard to diagnose in the beginning. Okay. But one of the things that it's really pointing out is illnesses sickness can affect our environment. How weird is that? Okay, this is 2018. Now, I do want to tell you that the astrologers knew something was coming even at this time. And we knew 2 years probably at least before that pandemic, something was coming. We didn't, it's not out there because there's no point, you don't panic people. But on the other hand, there is this whole attitude that we had in the beginning when we first knew something was coming, like, will we survive? Obviously, we're surviving. So this, and even that question, will we survive, is so Neptune. So there's a real Neptune quality to this Aries Chiron, especially this round of Aries Chiron. So here we have the, and here you see Chiron, but this is the chart. And the reason why Neptune is very, very strong in this chart and well worth looking at is because the chart itself is ruled by Neptune, and Neptune sits on the ascendant. That is just mind-blowing. So Neptune has kind of, hijacked a lot of this particular Aries. But I don't want it to look as hijacked, because that is really not what's happening. It is through the process of Neptune that we are able to redefine ourselves, discover what's not working, and be able to fix it. And we wouldn't necessarily be in that good of a shape if this chart didn't really spring this idea of illness on us. Excuse me. I just like to stop when the sirens go. I can't really talk too well. It really distracts me, so I might as well just wait till they're gone. So here we are. We have Neptune, and Neptune rules this chart, as we just were talking about. But Neptune does more than that. It really tells us via this trine, okay, that during this time, we are going to see leadership issues, a lot of leadership issues. And it's interesting because in 2018, we had a very Chironic kind of president in the United States. And remember, again, I'm going to talk a little bit about houses and ascendants, but each person needs to do this chart. They need to look at the ingress of Aries, which would be in universal time, roughly 8:15, 8:30 in the morning. And then from that time, see where it would be in your neck of the woods. And check it out how this little configuration I'm drawing for you fits, because you're still going to have Neptune trining Hades and Kronos. And this is deception in high places. This is shame from high places. This is, Hades is not a great thing. Kronos it's like great crime. It's because it's the part of our healing is this deception regarding great crime. What is the one thing we've been talking about since the election? How some people really buy into that big lie. Wow, that's really accurate there, okay? And how there are many leaders involved in that. That's one. Realize that person, that president, didn't feel that the rules applied to him at that time, and that he is very much a part of this. Now, I also want to point out that this Chiron is in a very, very sharp square. While it's in a square, it's trining Neptune, but it is in a larger square to both Hades, and since we're doing an ingress chart, I will take it to Hades and Kronos. So look at that energy. Like there's this pathway of conversation just going on between all of these points. Now, I'm not doing it, but if I were to use a 15-degree dial, these would be an aspect as well. So we're not going to get to that. That's some fancy math. But here we can see it just in our wheel. We can see that the Neptune is in this conversation where it's in a trine, not, again, very wide orbs here. So it's not like in the case of Hades, It's not like right there, but if you're a Hellenistic astrologer, if you're studying an age, well, that would be definitely an aspect, that 10 degrees. I'm not going to say on a personal level, you would think that it wouldn't be so strong, but you're going to see here that it is really strong. Okay, so one of the things we know is the first house, remember all of this is in the first and the second house. So we've got all this energy over here. The first house is I am. I do not have to follow the rules. So anyone in a position of authority thinks they don't have to follow the rules. Well, that's not true. Some authorities are not that way, but there's a great number of them that, yeah, that could happen. So then you have this illusion. You have the fact that even people in positions of authority might not know what to do with what's going to be happening in the next couple of years when when that Chiron takes over Aries. Now, Chiron in Aries is about literally changing everything. Remember that both Saturn and Uranus are associated with structures. Saturn would be the internal, Uranus would be the external. But what it's saying is we need to heal this because this isn't good. These are not going well. It started when the president lost the House. Well, he did. He lost the House in 2018. Here we go with, there are no real coincidences here, right? That's pointing out that was him beginning to lose everything. And it was because he didn't think he had to follow the rules. Okay. The other thing that this is pointing to is this whole idea of healing what we value, healing an economic system, if you will, and maybe allowing it to be more equitable. Now, this is a process that's just beginning. We don't know how long it'll take, but we do know that here we go again with the cause of this is that Sun Uranus. The Sun Uranus is definitely going to be a huge factor in what's going on here. Okay. Now it does square Volcanus. So Volcanus is these eruptions. Volcanus is the idea that that there's pressure applied to the situation. It's like it's just really strong pressure. And so you get this attitude that unpredictable men or unpredictable situations with men are going to be part of what applies pressure to this change. It's like a pressure cooker, if you will. Now, also, when you look at that, it's still in trine to some heavy karma, black moon, what our patterns have been, and Cupido is still there, our associations. So now we begin to establish a connection here, though they are not, here we go again. This is not a real square or a real, that's really, they almost have nothing to do with each other until you look at that. Okay, let me go back because I'm really making a mess here, my doodle. So this part, that Sun and Uranus, okay, this are really in trine, if you will, to this. Okay, so that karma, the pattern, and it's the pattern karmatically of something that's been set up as a trine. Okay, so that means that this Uranus Sun has made it easier to stick with the pattern in associations. Okay, I'm not going to say good or bad, not putting that in there yet. Okay, just saying that they are doing that because a trine just makes it easier. Okay, so here you have this, we're getting all these messages about how we don't have to follow rules. We can be uniquely ourselves. And what that does is it doesn't allow us to move forward karmatically. Or agencies. And I want to go with that associations because that's what Cupido is also families. Okay? But where this comes in again, and just reiterating, is the actual, not so much, here we go again, energy to this, but energy to that. So in other words, it's the Chiron. How things connect is not always, how do I put this? You got to look a little bit. All right. You do want to look at your squares. You want to look at aspects, but you really want to look at where and how these things are connected. And I do want to point out to you that Mercury is, oh, there we go. Now you know how to do that. Mercury is a really important part of this chart because you're going to see this. Mercury is also squaring all of this, which means messages from leaders. It means that there is media and news outlets, and particularly if you look at the trine to this, okay? It's right in there. Now, not so much, oh, it is 8 degrees, Mercury. There you go, okay? But when you start connecting up that Hades Chronos, this is Trump lying 50,000 times to Americans and it being documented by, I guess it was, it was Washington Post, New York Times, but somebody did. And so that Mercury is also helping to aid us in that Chiron. Mercury also is between the midpoint of these two, very close to the midpoint, I think it is exact, is a health asteroid, which means that some of the news that we're going to be hearing that is Chiron, changing things, is healing things, but changing them is a health matter. Okay, I'll show you that even more clearly, when we get to the asteroids and solar fire. But I really needed to talk about this because I think it's really important to note, and we're getting ready for what's to come because of that Pluto is coming into a square, okay, to the moon. To the sun. Now, Moon Venus, that's why I was looking at it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Moon Venus, all right, that is in connection to Jupiter. So it is about healing. It is about expanding. It's about healing. It's about doing good. Venus is so complimentary and kind, and it's so money for the people, finances. But it also can be talking about people who are very self-centered or thinking only about themselves. So that's a whole other thing. I'm not worried about that right now. Jupiter right here is in a perfect opposition to that Venus, which means things on a personal level, like spending too much money. And I would imagine that there are a lot of people right now spending a lot of money on their home or buildings, okay, just because they're in them a lot right now, or office supplies. Okay, so that is another factor in all of this, is that connection of Jupiter healing the moon and Venus. The downside, again, money. But what I love about this particular chart, Washington, D.C., and you notice I'm trying to stay a little bit away from the houses. I did want to talk about how it was the face of Washington that was going to help us. In other words, what was going on with that Chiron president was going to help us look at our value systems. It's interesting because I think that's exactly what happened. Whether you good or bad, whether you're of the Trumpian thought form or not, it brings up a lot of stuff about what we value in life and how we value life, period. And the connection here is really cool because look at this. And this is 57 minutes. So even though it's like 21, okay? So we literally have slightly more than 2.5 degrees when this Jupiter will then cross into the house of change. And one of the things I want to point out about Jupiter in the eighth house is that going into the ninth is it is about healing with regards to resources, whether it be the country's resources, because combined resources would be the eighth house. But I also think of things like the big money people, okay, and how the big money people will be affected by the changing of a value system of the people. And I think we already have our answer by the way that a lot of companies are responding to voter laws changing. Okay. Now, so we saw this with regards to Trump, and then he begins to lose everything. And now our value systems are changing and healing. No, it's not going to be easy. And there's a lot of heartbreak involved in that, but it's happening. But let's look at this from a whole other perspective, this whole little scenario that we have. Okay. This whole little scenario of Chiron and of Demeter even being here, okay, because that's another Chiron square, hugely Chiron square. And you think about that Demeter being, in this particular case, Washington, D.C., fourth house, and it is about families and parenting. And let's be honest, during the virus, parenting roles have really evolved, okay? So now the parent is also a teacher and a parent. And so parenting and the idea of older adults and then having to be taken care of by their children. So you have a lot of caretaking and parental type things going on, if you notice, in the home. Okay. Now, as this straddles the fifth house, which is our self-expression, there is a whole other level of things that are going on. Remember this Uranus Sun aspect that we have been talking about? Okay. And remember that as it affects that square to Volcanus, need to be strong, need to prove oneself, need to prove that you're right in being, what is the word I want to use? You're right in being a jerk. I don't know. It's basically you're right in being who you are, using that whole I don't need to follow the rules thing. And guess what happens? Floyd and Derek Chauvin. Okay. So this is both of those gentlemen, by the way, on both sides of that are Uranus Sun. Very unexpected things happened to George Floyd. And Derek Chauvin, who was, I can do what I want, found out he cannot do what he wants. So there's Sun Uranus acting out Hades Chronos. And all it's doing, Hades Chronos, and it will continue to do that till the year 2030, is point out how bad people in authority positions can be. And part of our job will be to set laws that regulate that, for people to stand up and to say, what? Didn't we get past this? Wasn't 68 about that? Think about that. In 68, that was the first time it was. So they had an Aries ingress in 68. That Aries ingress stayed in effect too off and on for the next 9 years. Okay. We're in a 68 moment in a way when it comes to this. And I'm really hopeful. Now, what's interesting is ours culminated through the first part of Aries, whereas I think in 68, it was the real beginning of doing something. Whereas I feel like we're picking it up. So we're going a little bit later into Aries to start working on it, but it's happening and it's a continuation. So it's just a proof that life is cycles and we're back here again. And each time you get back, every time you cycle around, you're supposed to do it better. You're supposed to evolve, mature, right? That's life. So that's what's been happening with us for 3 years. This chart is highly accurate for 3 years. It told us about a pandemic. I'm going to show you where it shows us social distancing in a minute. It tells us about the news not being reliable. The whole issue we're having with Mercury and the internet and how disinformation has really just eviscerated really our democracy in a way. It's torn at the edges of the democracy in this country. And that's in this chart. But what I love about this chart is that everything that you and I have been talking about, or I've been talking about, you've been listening, is all stuff that needs to be healed and all stuff that we really can make progress on. It is a shame that we had to let things get so bad before we change them, but isn't that the way the pendulum works? So let's look at yet another chart here. So we are on the other chart. I did run some asteroids just for the heck of it. I don't want to go too long on this one, but I wanted to show you a couple of things. First of all, remember in Janus, I did tell you that there was an asteroid that was running with Chiron that was health, that told you, indicated to you that there could be health crises or a health issue. So here we are. Here's Chiron, just to show you, second house, okay? And you see that 0, 0, 0, right? So we come over here and you see Chiron again. And next to it is this health asteroid. So right there is what I was referring to. It tells you, not just that Neptune ruling this chart tells you, but that there's something going on here. Now, one of the things I like to do, and I'm going to do it right now, because again, I don't want to get too long-winded here, and it's already getting pretty long, but let's look at this. Oh, no. Here we go. Let's look at this. So we're looking at right now, and this is not the asteroid. This is simply just the planets. But look at how Neptune has affected that chart. Look at, we don't even have any real solutions. I mean, Neptune is also ongoing. A disease that's been going on for so long. Look at that. Look at that. That's Hygeia, by the way. That's not even the health asteroid I was referring to. That's a separate one. Okay, so that's even closer, by the way. That's less than a degree away. We have it trining Jupiter. So whatever's going on is expanding. It's being allowed to expand. It's making it difficult to resolve. And that is countered by the contraparallel. So it really is very aspected. There's the press issues. Neptune trine Poseidon. It's people that they're still taking advantage. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And they call it free speech. I call it disinformation. And I don't understand how they're getting away with it. But then we come down here to Chiron. This is the ingress. Look at the square to Vesta. That is our first indication that part of this healing is going to require distancing. A focus on our goals too. And how hard is it to do either? It's going to take work, and it has. Chiron conjuncting Mercury. Again, we talked about this. This idea that, that people don't have to follow the rules. They can say whatever they want. But then what has that done? What has that done to the public? So I wanted to bring that up before I get into the asteroids here. Okay? So the asteroids, what I really felt was important here was, in this particular case, was looking at the dial and going through these, first of all, midpoints. Well, here we already know that authority figures are often going to be in the environment. Now, remember that doctors are also authority figures. So when you turn on the news, do you not almost every day hear from a doctor? And that's been true for for the majority of the 3 years. Not so bad prior to the COVID issue. But then it was Trump, you see. So we weren't really free of it. Now, if I bring it and look at that, Chiron is up there with Cupido. And one of the things that has to heal, and notice that I'm using the word heal, is associations. And that would be the cops. But I think the Republican Party is feeling that way as well, because they've been infiltrated a lot since Tea Party days. I mean, they just have been taken over. And so they're in that position now where they have to heal. And how is that going to be when they have so many in the association that don't think they have to follow the rules? Okay. So again, not to be political, not important. It is important. But unfortunately, politics is also part of our evolution. And we can only have as good a leaders as we put in. And we have to understand that we're also dealing with a human aspect. And until we put in regulations that will protect us even more from our leaders, we have to, as a people, always be awake. Okay. Now, moving into, and that goes for any country, by the way, any country. I'm speaking because I'm looking at the United States chart, but I think in this day and age, it really does speak to all people, that all of us need to make those in charge accountable. So here's another area where I saw illness, okay? I'm going to point it out here. Here she is, Hypatia. And Hypatia is, well, basically in medical astrology, it's your nurse practitioner, okay? Vesta node is telling us that we're probably going to have to keep distance from our connections, even our work connections. That's just right there. Admetus ascendant is also fewer in the environment, less people. It's also things like obstacles, which we do have. I mean, testing was an obstacle. The vaccinations have their own obstacles. So each part of this does, and it goes slow or is delayed based on whatever that is. But in this particular case, it's an Ecuadorian ascendant. Basically what it's saying is fewer in the environment. Boy, look at that. It's right in there. And look at this for revolution. That's a revolution. Mars, Uranus, what do we have but an insurgents at the Capitol? This chart's mind-blowing. This chart is absolutely mind-blowing how accurate it is. I love this stuff. So just fairly briefly, before I let you go, I just want to go through and point out anything else I may have seen. Like down here, for example, let me go down here, for example, at the 15 degree of fixed, we have Tantalus, which means temptation is going to be a huge part of this. We're feeling tested a lot during this sojourn. And there's your mental health. There's the people that sometimes will lose it. Tantalus is temptations of all kinds. Then we go on, and there's not a whole lot. I will say that. We talked about Demeter. We talked about Messenger as it relates to Mercury. So Messenger is still in there. Okay. We did talk about Demeter. That's the ability to care for oneself and to care for others. Also, the idea of nursing homes were really, really at risk. And one of the things that shows up in the axis is at risk. So it is about taking care of ourselves because we're all at risk, but particularly take care of older adults or older parents because they are at risk. Okay. And other than that, money is, is interesting. Money shows up in this chart, but not like you would think. You would think with that very, very full second house, we'd be doing a lot more with the money issues, but I'm not really seeing that because and I have to say this, it does seem that, and I can speak from experience here as well, when you don't have the money or you don't spend it, but you're not going out right now, or, well, we are now starting to, as I'm actually getting my second shot tomorrow. So we are all, or we've all been staying home. And I know myself, I live in town, so we would eat out sometimes 5 nights a week, depending on how busy we all were, 4 nights a week. And even though we do takeout and we do it at least once a week, we don't do it like we did going to restaurants. We just don't. I cook more, and that's just how we do it right now. I'm not saying it won't go back, but Demeter meals have changed. The business that got hit the worst was that business, the restaurant business, the food business. So other than that, there's also this idea of questioning things. And that I definitely feel is part of questioning masks, questioning shots, questioning tests. We are all getting tested. That's the other thing. Getting tested is also Tantalus. Tantalus is not just temptation, it's also getting tested. So it's pretty interesting that that would be in this chart. But I always would say you can look at that as temptation. The other things I see here are sadness. Oh, this will make sense with regards to travel. Traveling was not something we did during this Aries. No. And I think that before travel gets back to normal, we might not be in Aries. I mean, I'm hoping it comes back for everyone's sake before then, but I think there's still going to be a little apprehension even as people begin to travel again. Also, what countries can you go to? And is it safe there? So there's a lot of questioning on that one for real. Yeah, there's a lot on this one. I like that. I like that brought. It does bring up Orpheus. One of the things that was going to happen during this Chiron ingress was also related to an Orpheus. And here's Orpheus. I was going to say, I knew I could. The other thing that kind of shows up here is right below it, Letitia, which means that a lot of things were going in this particular direction prior to this Aries ingress or prior to the pandemic. But during the process of Aries Chiron, but also the COVID-19, people are changing directions. I know so many people who've changed their jobs. So it was an opportunity and people took it. So there's a lot of good with a lot of this stuff. There's still going to be some sadness through, like I said, this Aries kind of touches on that. And as a result, there is going to be a lot of confusion, scatteredness. And I think that also comes from this, not just the deaths, but also from this whole idea here of changing directions, that going into a new direction, changing a business, maybe, giving the business a new goal. And then the last but not least, it does talk about money, but only in the sense of kind of looking ahead toward money and making money. So in other words, it's again not about I really, really need money, but it's more about how we operate with money, how we utilize money, and how that could be changing. Also, how we make money, and I already said that. But Dolero is running with Delphi, and that also is referring to future. Delphi is, kind of foresighted, looking into the future. So when it comes to money, I know people have been devastated during the COVID, but I think the government's done a heck of a job helping people out and looks like continuing to helping people. And that means that people can sort of set themselves up for the future. And that's what I do see here in astrology. So that's a really good thing. So let me come back. So I'm back, and I just wanted to once again, thank you for watching the video. And again, remind you, please like, share. Let's really educate. That's what I really want to do with this channel. So the more you help me build, the more I can educate. And that's what I like to do. So with that said, I do hope that you gained something through our experience with Chiron. I think it's mind-blowing to look at a chart in hindsight. And I hope that you're as excited about that as I am. that this chart could be so accurate it just is amazing to me. So it really is amazing. And I'm hoping that it's as amazing to you as well. So I will leave it there. I want to wish you, as I always do, only happy readings. But in this day and age, I want to also leave you with be well and take care of yourself.